Welcome to Bible Study Hub. I'm so glad you're with me. I'm Ann Wiggins, and we are in the book of Genesis. We will hopefully make it through even chapter 40 tonight, which means only 10 chapters left. 10 chapters left after this one. So we're starting to get towards the end of this amazing book, which I have enjoyed so much. Well, to just kind of give us a running start, last week in chapter 38, we're starting in 39 tonight. We had kind of this parentheses that had a story about Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. And it really doesn't seem to have anything to do specifically with what came before it or what comes after it. It's just kind of dropped into the middle for its own special purpose in the Word of God. So if you missed that, you can go back to last week and you can watch that. That would be just fine. But tonight, we are going to be picking up in chapter 38. Now, before we get to 38, I want to back up 2 chapters to the very end of chapter 37, right before that parentheses happened, because this actually greases the skids for what we want to talk about tonight. 37 ends by saying, meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him, that's Joseph, into Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. That's really important information. So we're going to leapfrog over chapter 38 tonight, since we already did that, and we're going to get right into the next chapter. Now, this captain of the guard is, I mean, it sounds official, but we don't really have that type of title in our own society. So what exactly was a captain of the guard? What did they do? Who does Joseph work for? Because it's kind of important to know that information. We're not 100% sure of all this guy's responsibilities as Potiphar, the captain of the guard, but we do know from Jeremiah chapter 52 that a captain of the guard is mentioned there. Now, different time, different culture, could have been slightly different, but Jeremiah's book, Captain of the Guard, says that the guy was in charge of executions. So I think it is fair to assume that this captain of the guard, Potiphar, may have been in charge of executions as well. And even if he wasn't in charge of them, as somebody who oversaw a lot of the military, he would have definitely had access to executions, okay? Just kind of put that in your brain, because that's going to be a little bit interesting here to note coming up. So let's get right into the text in chapter 39, and here we go. It says, now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him. And he, Potiphar, made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. He's not stupid. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. Well, Joseph just happens to be bought by Potiphar, this Egyptian who's high-ranking government official. Now we say, just happened, because obviously God's hand is in this. There are so many places in the Bible where we don't necessarily read, and God did this or God said that, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to observe that God's fingerprints are all over these situations. So for Joseph, it probably feels rather random when this happens. He's bought by this random guy, but it's not random because God is in it. So Joseph becomes this walking testimony of the real true God as he serves his master, Potiphar. And I just thought to myself, I hope and I pray that for those of us who are devoted followers of Jesus, that people around us get splashed by the blessings that God puts on our lives. And often we think of blessings as merely a monetary or physical sort of thing. And it can be that for sure. God can use that. But that's certainly not the full extent of his blessings. Just his presence in our lives, his goodness, his love, his compassion, all of those things that we possess as believers because the Holy Spirit indwells us, that too should splash onto all the people around us. And for Joseph, it was great. So you can imagine how Satan is feeling about the situation. I mean, we saw again the fingerprints of Satan all over this situation where Joseph's own brothers devise to kill him and then at the last minute decide, oh, we can get money if we sell him. That was Judah's idea. They end up selling him into slavery. I'm sure Satan figured, okay, we can, whatever those dreams were that God gave him, we're going to make sure that never happens. So now Joseph is in Potiphar's house and God is blessing him and God is being glorified and Joseph is on task and serving the Lord and serving Potiphar, and Satan has to be like, not what I wanted to happen. What can I do? And so he decides, I know how I can stop this. I will take the oldest trick in the book, the one that I used on Judah last chapter with Tamar. We are going to trip this guy up morally easy, and then God's blessings will stop. So let's find out if the ploy works. Going on to verse 6b to 10. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. He was a good-looking guy. And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me, which I think you know what that means, right? Yeah, she wants to be intimate with him. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against who? Against him? No, he says against God. In other words, sinning against Potiphar in the end is a sin against his God, which is far greater than a sin against any other human being. I think that's fascinating. Verse 10, and as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. Now, remember how Joseph gets here. He has the ultimate betrayal by his brothers, like we just said. He's thrown into a pit, almost murdered, sold into slavery. He could have really decided to be angry at God at this point, right? And walk away. And instead, he maintains his character and he maintains his integrity. I also see something. If you remember back, when Joseph was sent out by his father to kind of get a scope on the brothers out in the field with the flocks and bring back a report, and it says Joseph brought back a bad report. And a lot of people then say, oh, Joseph was a tattletale. He was running back to daddy with this bad. That's not what was going on. As firstborn status, that's a whole different thing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to listen back. But he, because of some things Reuben, the firstborn, did, Reuben was rejected from firstborn status. It was bestowed on Joseph instead. His job was to be the mediator of his father's household. It was his job to serve his father and to go and do whatever his father said as the mediator between the family. So when he brought back a bad report, it wasn't to be a tattletale. It was to do exactly what he was supposed to do. It was an act of character. It was an act of integrity that he didn't mince that. He brought it back accurately. And you can see how Joseph has been prepared in serving his father, unbeknownst to him, that he would end up serving Potiphar, this really high-ranking government official. And he was completely prepared to do that because he had already done this for his own dad. Well, let's go on to verse 11 to 18. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house, she, Potiphar's wife, caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, see, he, Potiphar, her husband, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. And some translations might say to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that, I lifted up my voice and cried out. He left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to laugh at me or mock me. As soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Oh my word. Does anybody here have just a real feeling of disdain for this woman? Let's get real for a minute, though. If this lady is propositioning Joseph day after day after day after day, is it possible that maybe she had a little bit of a reputation for this type of thing? I mean, I hate to say this, but have you ever known somebody who kind of had, unfortunately, a reputation for just being an absolute flirt with whoever happened to be around? Or a person who just goes from person to person to person to person to person, has really a problem with some immorality happening. I remember way back when I was in college, I had a job working at a store, and the man who owned the store came in early on in my time working there with a lady and two little children, and it was obvious that she was his wife and those were her kids, and I didn't think anything about it. And then I don't know how long it was until somebody that was working there one time mentioned this man, his name, and his mistress. And I said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you talking about?" And they said, "Yeah, the lady that comes in with the little children, yeah, that's his mistress, and those are his kids with her." I said, "Does he wait a minute, but he's married?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Does his wife know?" They said, "Yeah." Like, this is completely commonplace. This is like 30 years ago. "Oh, yeah, she knows." They said they have an arrangement. So she lives in the great big house, a ways away, and he spends part of his time with her, and then he has his mistress here. And then when he comes to visit this store, he'll stay with her. And it was just like, yeah, that's just the kind of person that he is. And everybody just sort of, went with it. My point being, if you are that type of person, typically people around just kind of notice that type of thing. So it's a little hard for me to believe that everybody is shocked by the situation, or has a- absolute confidence in Potiphar's wife and then think, "Oh, Joseph is a horrible person." They know Joseph, they know her. Let's connect some dots here. Verses 19 to 20. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, "This is the way your servant treated me," his anger was kindled. Okay. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. He's now been thrown in a pit. And now we're going to add to that resume of being imprisoned in a dungeon, probably. He describes it as a dungeon later on in this book. Well, Egypt was one of the only ancient civilizations that really utilized prisons on a large scale. If you remember in the book of Acts, we really talked about like Roman prisons and their justice system and how they really didn't use prisons for like long-term incarcerations for the most part. I mean, they had some house arrest and things, but like actual prison, you either went there to be held for execution or you were pretty much exonerated and let free, but they didn't use it to hold you for long, long periods of time. But in Egypt, they did. So it's possible that if you went to prison, you might be there for life. I mean, they don't really have a court system like we do. You may not have a jury by peers. You may just be there for the duration. They also would hold, for execution, the ones that were going to be executed. So let me ask you a question here. Why do you think Potiphar didn't just execute Joseph? You can start typing. We said a little bit ago when we first started our study tonight that um, Potiphar, as the captain of the guard, would likely have had either charge of executions or most certainly have had the ability to have a hand in those types of things. So it seems as though if that's kind of your job and this guy tried to rape your wife, that it would be kind of a no-brainer that you would just kill him. You know what I mean? So my question to you is why do you think he didn't do that? All right, let's see here. I'm looking at your comments. Okay. Okay. Carolyn says, because he respected Joseph. Okay, I think that's a really valid answer. Alan says, I think he didn't fully believe the situation, i.e., his wife's story. I wondered the very same thing. I think that's good. Um, somebody else saying he knew his wife. Yep. Maybe someone says he maybe put him in jail to settle his wife, but he knew Joseph's heart and integrity. That's an interesting comment too. Maybe he was like, if I do nothing, I'm going to have a problem on my hands with this woman. So, but if I put him in prison, at least she will be pacified and I don't look like a complete loser. It's an interesting thought. Somebody else says Joseph had a reputation already for being a faithful servant. He most certainly did. Lori says, I'm sure he had an inkling about his wife. I'm sure he did. Somebody, Shirley says, probably didn't truly believe his wife. Okay. Susie says, probably knew his wife was to blame and he knew Joseph was a man of God. Agree. Dottie's saying he still had use for Joseph. Oh, that's an interesting comment. Okay. There definitely is a use for Joseph coming up. Roberta says he knew God's favor was on him and he did not want God to get mad at him if he did kill him. I hadn't thought about that, Roberta. That's really insightful too. Love it. Love all of your comments. And I think you're all right on the money. Everything you said. It's probably a combination of like literally everything that you said. And it's also possible too that God just supernaturally spared Joseph's life. And for whatever reason, he put it into the heart of Potiphar that, no, you're not killing this one. And he just decided not to. But that's kind of a basic answer. I think you guys nailed it. All right, let's see here. Verses 21 to 23. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. This is really kind of an amazing thing. You know, Joseph has now been twice terribly abused at no fault of his own. He has been um, sold into slavery, put into prison, and all he's ever done is the right thing. He keeps doing the right thing, and horrible things keep happening to him. This is why we say there is no karma. Karma is not a thing because this violates all the karma in the whole world. Karma, you do the right thing, good things happen to you. Bad things you do, bad things happen to you. And sometimes that does work out, but not always. Sometimes it's just the opposite. So you have to account for those things. This is real life. Sometimes, as the saying goes, bad things happen to good people. We put that in quotes because we know none of us are intrinsically good. We're all sinners in need of a savior. But you know what I'm saying. Somebody who predominantly does the right things, bad things happen to them. So I think the question that I ask here is, at this point, why wouldn't Joseph just walk away from the Lord? At this point, why wouldn't he just say, you know what? I'm getting kind of tired of this. I'm getting tired of serving the Lord, being faithful to the Lord, worshiping the Lord, telling other people about the Lord, enduring all of this hardship for the Lord. And then at the end of the day, there's no protection, there's no help. Where is God now? Now I'm in a dungeon because I did the right thing, because I honored him. I'm done. I'm walking away. I'm not doing this anymore. This is really, really important stuff here. A person of true integrity, the kind of integrity that, quite honestly, is only produced by the Holy Spirit living in us and shining through us. A person of integrity will do the right thing, not because of the outcome, but because of their love for the Lord. Big difference. So if you do the right thing because you love God, for us, we love Jesus. We know about him now. Joseph obviously didn't know of Jesus yet, but he loved God. When you do it for that outcome, because you just love the Lord, then whatever happens, you accept. You may not like it. It might be awful. You might hate it. You might pray that God will take it away, but you accept it because you didn't do it for the outcome. You did it because you love the Lord. That's Joseph. And quite frankly, that is one of the marks of a true believer. Somebody who is genuinely saved has as a general characteristic in their life that they do the right thing because they love the Lord, not because they're trying to produce a certain outcome. You want to be really careful of the people that you listen to on Christian television and radio and the books that you read, because there's a predominant thought out there that you give money to organizations like, like theirs, usually, like they're always saying, give me money. You do that to sow a seed so that God has to bless you. Well, that's doing something good for the outcome, not because you love him, but because you're trying to get him to give you something. Big difference. When you give to a ministry, when you give to your church, you give to God because it's an act of worship, not because you're trying to get him to bless you. If he does bless you, wow, what a kind and compassionate and gracious thing of him to do, right? But he doesn't owe us anything, and that's not why we do it. Susie's saying amen. By the way, I kind of skipped over the whole thing of Joseph, running from this woman to the point that she's holding his coat, like he takes his arms out of his overcoat and off he goes. And I only skipped over that mainly because I've heard about 1 million sermons on that, and I assume that most of you have too. And I think the text just speaks for itself, right? Like, there's a picture of integrity. He doesn't even entertain this woman. He doesn't want to be around her. When she grabs onto him, he literally takes his arms out of his sleeves and keeps running. I think you get that. Amen. Praise God. Something to aspire to. We all need to make choices like that. I meant to say that really, really quickly. But let's see here. Emily is saying, Joseph's being a man of God also allowed him to rise in great favor of all these situations. Yeah. And I know you are right on that. And God does raise him, I should say, in that, for sure. And Susie is agreeing with that. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Let's go to chapter 40 now. Ooh, look at us. We're getting to a new chapter in the same Bible study. We're flying. 1-4 of chapter 40. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. This would be the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody of the house of the captain of the guard in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. They continued for some time in custody. So let's talk about this interesting cupbearer and baker, these positions. So in ancient times, kings placed a lot of trust and faith in their cupbearers. The cupbearer would have been like the king's right-hand man, we might have said. So before kings consumed any of their meals, this cupbearer would do what you probably guess, which is taste the drink and make sure it's not poison. That's kind of inherent in the name, but it went so much further than that. He would also take little bites of his food. Can you imagine? Like, your plate gets down and you look at your cupbearer and he's like, just a second, avoid the escargot. Yeah, I don't know, but he would get to take a little bite out of everything apparently, just to make sure he doesn't die. So if he does die, the king knows that was poisoned. Don't eat it. What a harrowing job that would be. I mean, you'd probably get a lot of really good food, and maybe like if you were a real foodie, that would kind of offset the chances of death. I think for me, I'd rather not be in that position. But anyway, the cupbearer would also be in charge of the opulent utensils that the king would use. Now think about this, because I'd never thought about this before. So you're a king, you're in ancient times, you don't have all the technology we do today to offer protection for things. And you're thinking to yourself, what if the food's okay? What if the drink's okay? But my fork has been poisoned. That would be terrible. So literally the cupbearer had charge of the utensils, and he would keep them. And then he would hand over the spoon, and I don't know what they ate with, hand over the knife, and then they would use that. And if he traveled to somewhere else, The cupbearer would gather up all of his eating and drinking utensils, his plate, his cup, his silverware, all his stuff, and he would bring it with them so that when they got to the destination, wherever they were going to visit, he would unload like a picnic basket, Pharaoh's special plate, special cup, special thing, and then he would taste everything and, drink it. So isn't that an interesting thing? So here's a guy that obviously Pharaoh really, really has to place a lot of trust in, because if anybody can take Pharaoh out, it's the cupbearer. All he has to do is just, a little sleight of hand, and Pharaoh takes a drink of something poisonous. So I found a relief that they excavated not too long ago. Apparently, this is a limestone like carving from ancient Egypt of a cupbearer. What's missing in the picture to me is the cup. I don't understand it. I don't know if the cup fell off the relief or what. Anyway, I always think those things are quite interesting. Thought you might enjoy it too. But let's talk about the baker now. So now you're an expert in cupbearing. But baking, again, did not know this, but find it truly fascinating that in ancient Egypt, they were amazing bakers. They made exquisite breads and sometimes incredibly beautiful and ornate breads, but it was a real staple in their diet. And to match the picture I just showed you, I wanted to come up with a different one. This is an ancient Egyptian bread making container. And you can see somebody has actually made a loaf of bread in it to the right. Yes, that's bread. The reason it's so weird is because they would dig a hole in the ground and put hot coals in the ground. Then they would put the dough in that container, which is, as you can see, conical in shape. They would put a lid on it, another stone lid. They would stick it down into that hole with the hot coals so that you can see how the hot coals would be enveloping the whole bottom of it. And then they would put hot coals on top of it on the lid. And they would bake the bread in this clay container in the hot coals. And so when it came out, it was in conical shape like that. Interesting. But not all their bread looked like that, apparently. Some of their bread was more like normal bread that we would think of today. I just think it's interesting. So anyway, this baker wasn't just like, some ancient caveman, banging on wheat or something. I mean, he was an artisan. He made all the royal bread for Pharaoh's, I said Herod's, for Pharaoh's household, and it would have been beautiful, ornate, gorgeous, good, yummy bread. So another really high ranking position, a professional position. So these are the two guys who Pharaoh gets mad at and throws into prison. I always pictured before I did a really deep dive on this that like maybe Pharaoh didn't like the taste of his bread or something and threw him in prison. And maybe, he didn't like the cup that the cupbearer brought his wine in. And that's not what happened at all. Probably these guys were accused of being in some kind of assassination plot, some kind of poisoning the Pharaoh plot that was foiled. Hard to say because the Bible doesn't tell us, but whatever it was major. This isn't just like I didn't like the taste of my wheat this day. So let's go on and see what happens. And one night, they both, the cupbearer and the baker, both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream. So they were separate dreams, not the same dream. And each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" He says, "Why are you sad?" He notices that they don't look right, which is really sweet. They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So they know that these dreams have meaning, but they have nobody who can help them with them. And they're really upset about it because dreams and interpretations of dreams are a big, big thing in this ancient Egyptian society. And we'll talk more about that next week. You're going to find it utterly fascinating. But for now, we'll move on. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, "In my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and clusters ripened into grapes." So it's like vine, poof, you have grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. So you can imagine at this point, this guy wakes up having dreamed this and he goes, what does it mean? What's going to happen? Is it good? It feels good. I think it's good, but what if it's not good? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do so? I mean, he's really got a lot of anxiety over this. You can see why. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. And God is giving him this information right now. The three branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. And then Joseph adds this little request. You can almost see him like take the guy's arm or something. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so to get me out of this house, for I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. And here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit. Don't miss this insight into Joseph's heart. Sometimes I think that we believe that Joseph, he made it to Pharaoh's house and he's serving under Potiphar and he's like, hey, this actually worked out really, really good. I'm happy here. No, he wasn't. He says, I was stolen out of my home country, out of the land of the Hebrews. He hasn't forgotten. That still really hurts him. And then, we read, he rises up to the level of ruling over all the other prisoners, and he's like the top dog in the prison system. Like maybe he's okay with that. Maybe it's good now. No, he's saying, please get me out of here. I don't want to be here. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't even be there. But I would rather be there than here. Please, please, please don't forget me. Please mention me to Pharaoh. So here you have a man who has been so faithful to the Lord, even though he has truly, truly suffered, like above and beyond anything that any of us have ever been through, I'm sure. Well, let's go on and let's see what happens next. Oops. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, so he's sitting back and he's watching this and he goes, that worked out pretty good for him. Okay, I'll tell you mine. He said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head. And in the utmost basket, there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. So I think it's interesting that the cupbearer immediately volunteered his dream information. As soon as Joseph said, hey, God is the one who interprets, tell me your dream, he's like, okay. And he tells him, which indicates to me that the cupbearer is innocent of charges. He wants to know, hoping that this is good news for him. The baker, on the other hand, he holds back. Did you notice that? He listens, he watches, and as soon as Joseph says, 3 days, you're going to be exonerated, you'll be back in your position doing your old job. Then the baker says, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll tell you mine too. Not so willing prior to a good interpretation for the other guy, which indicates to me that the baker was probably guilty. And that's why he wasn't super sure he wanted to share his dream. Well, it didn't go well for him. Obviously, we have no recollection or no recording, I should say, of his reaction to the interpretation of the dream. But here's what I want to really focus on. Sorry, I think I forgot to take that off. You remember back when Joseph, again, brought bad word back about his brothers to his father, even though he had to know that bringing a bad report back was not going to go well for him. But he did it anyway because he was a man of integrity and it was his job and it was the truth. And so he said the truth. That type of integrity, I think, is what fuels his ability and willingness to tell this baker some really, really bad news. I mean, this would be hard to do, don't you think? To tell somebody, oh, in 3 days, the king is going to hang you. Not like that's not bad enough. And then you're going to become a bird buffet. like the vultures are going to come down and pick you to the bone. That's horrible. What if Joseph hadn't wanted to do that? What if Joseph had said to the baker, "Oh, you know what? Yours is just kind of like foggy. I don't know. I'm not really getting the download on yours." Or what if he'd said, "Yeah, yours definitely has to do with 3 days. In 3 days, something's going to happen. I'm not totally sure what that is. You're going to have to wait and see, but has something to do with birds." Yeah, he could have done that, but he doesn't. He tells it exactly like it is, even though it has to be a little excruciating to have to deliver that kind of a message. He does it with strength and dignity and integrity and character. And had he not done that, the cupbearer would have had no impetus to ever think that he could interpret later Pharaoh's dream. That's coming up next week if you're not familiar with the story. The only reason that the cupbearer decides to divulge that he's got this friend who can interpret dreams is because Joseph did it impeccably, perfectly, with great detail. He got it all right. And because he did that here, 2 or 3 years later down the road, that is going to work out very much in his favor. Moving on, verses 20 to 23. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all of his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants, which just means like lifted up there. He didn't literally like lift their heads up, but he brought them up out of the dungeon. So their heads were lifted up above the where they were kept. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Exactly what Joseph said would happen. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them, which means the birds came along and also ate the flesh. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Oh, this is horrible. Did you ever wonder, like, how did he forget? Here's a guy who accurately interprets a dream 3 days out to the very details of everything that happens, and it all goes exactly like he said. How do you not remember that? Don't you think that you kind of would? Here's the thing though. That Hebrew word remember, it can also mean to mention. In fact, when Joseph says, "Could you mention me?" That same word mention is the word that he uses, remember me. It's the same exact Hebrew word. If you know the fourth commandment of the 10 commandments, it's remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. We know that doesn't mean like, don't forget it's Saturday. That's not what it means. It just means pay attention and do something with that information. And that's what that means. So the chief cupbearer, it's not like he had suddenly no recollection that Joseph existed. Of course he knew. And he didn't technically forget what had happened. He just procrastinated. He just didn't get around to telling Pharaoh anything about him. So I don't know if I wrote this down, but I want to ask. I don't think I did. I want to ask you, so just start typing. Why do you think that the cupbearer didn't keep up his end of the bargain and immediately go to Pharaoh and say, "There's a guy that you've imprisoned who should not be there, and let me tell you what he did for me"? Why do you think the cupbearer did not do that? Having established that it wasn't pure forgetfulness. Okay, I think that's probably clear. There was definitely a motive as to why he ignored. Maybe that's the best way to put it. He ignored Joseph. He just put it out of his mind, went about his business, and didn't do anything for him. Why do you think that was? It's kind of a big deal. Kind of goes to just like, what a scoundrel. I mean, you would think that he would be grateful, do something for him. Any ideas as to why that is? Why wouldn't he keep his end of the bargain? Why wouldn't he mention it to Pharaoh? Had to be a reason. Emily says the cupbearer may have thought he was still on thin ice and was just waiting until he felt more sure. You know what? I thought about that same thing. It's possible that once he got in there, he was like, uh, this isn't a very good time. Maybe I'll just wait a little while. Lori says, There was no advantage to him. Okay, so what she's saying is he's like, "I'm out of prison. What do I care? I go about my life." That's really good. Susie says, "Fingerprints of Satan." Tell you what, could not agree with you more. Oh, poor Joseph. I mean, you can just see how the devil is fighting against anything having to do with this guy, and most certainly anything to do with the promise of those dreams that God gave him of his brothers and even his father bowing before him, and trying to make sure that that never happens. Roberta says, may have been afraid Joseph would take over his position. Okay, so maybe he was like, yeah, the guy's a little too good. I don't think I want him back in the household again. Um, I don't know. Alan says, it want to. I have no idea what that means. I'm so sorry. I popped it up before I realized I had no idea. I have a feeling that you hit enter a little sooner than you thought. Okay, there it is. It wasn't time for Joseph to be promoted. Okay, so Alan is actually taking more of a like the perspective of God, that in God's perfect timing, it just wasn't time yet. And you can totally see that in the next chapter coming up when suddenly it is the time and let's just talk on iPhone. I know. I'll tell you what, autocorrect and all that stuff, Siri, it's going to be the death of all of us. No, it actually makes me happy that it happens to other people, not just me. But yeah, okay, so those are all really, really good comments. But for whatever reason, in God's providence, it wasn't the right time. And this cupbearer, whose name we don't even know, we're never told, he just decides to hang on to the information. But as Alan pointed out, in our next chapter next week, all of a sudden, God's timing is like, let's go. And when God is ready, believe me, it is worth the wait. And it's spectacular. So don't miss next week. You have to come back because it's fascinating how God works all these different pieces together, from culture to their religion, to the dream itself, to what's happening in the land, to the timing of Joseph, to what's going on with his brothers. I mean, it's unbelievable. As I always say, the stories that God writes are so much better than any novel of any novelist ever written. It's spectacular stuff. So I will hopefully see you back next Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time here on Bible Study Hub, Facebook, and YouTube. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Go make good decisions. And I look forward to seeing you again in another week. Bye bye.